Let's be very clear. Today's hearing is all about creating 2 new Democratic U.S. Senate seats. If you don't believe me, then listen to what our colleague across the aisle, Mr. Jamie Raskin, told the Washington Post, and I quote, "But there's a national political logic for it too, because the Senate has become the principal obstacle to social progress across a whole range of issues." H.R. 51, D.C. statehood, is actually Plan B of the Democrat political power grab. Plan A was to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate. But since it appears Joe Manchin isn't going to play these dirty Democratic games, now Speaker Pelosi is stepping in with an unconstitutional bill to make Washington, D.C. a city smaller than Columbus, Ohio, and a city that just happens to be 90% Democratic, the 51st state. D.C. statehood is a key part of the radical leftist agenda to reshape America, along with the Green New Deal, defunding the police, and packing the U.S. Supreme Court. Many problems exist with H.R. 51. The first is that it's flatly unconstitutional. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of civil rights champion Robert F. Kennedy, who said 60 years ago that granting D.C. statehood absent a constitutional amendment was inconceivable and would produce an absurdity. Take the word of all the Justice Departments from President Kennedy's to President Obama's. Take the word of John Dingell, a liberal titan, the longest-serving member of Congress who supported every single civil rights measure that passed before Congress for 40 years. Take the word of the late Senator Ted Kennedy, who dismissed what he called the statehood fallacy. Take the word of the former delegate from D.C., my colleague Eleanor Holmes Knowlton's predecessor, who had opposed statehood and recognized the constitutional problem. Take the word of the Democratic-controlled Congress in 1960, which explicitly rejected statehood and instead passed the 23rd Amendment, which gave D.C. 3 votes in the Electoral College. Democrats even acknowledged the unconstitutionality of the bill by inserting language trying to fix it. Of course, this language is meaningless because the only way to fix it is by a constitutional amendment. The second problem is that this bill goes flatly against what the Founding Fathers wanted for our capital city. The Founding Fathers were smart. They knew D.C. would grow as large as it is today. They envisioned it to be the size of Paris, which at the time is roughly equivalent to the size of D.C. today. They envisioned a thriving capital city with residential communities, green space, ports, and close access to America's leaders. The Founding Fathers knew this is what D.C. would become, everything that it is today. And they didn't want it to be a state. In fact, they overwhelmingly rejected it. They had other options, New York, Philadelphia, Trenton. Instead, they created D.C. Every Democrat who supports this bill should be asked one simple question. Is it their contention that the founders did not anticipate all the arguments that are currently being made for D.C. statehood? If they believe the founders did not anticipate the arguments, they are wrong. Alexander Hamilton, in fact, proposed granting representation in the House to the district, and it was rejected while ratifying the Constitution. If Democrats believe the founders did anticipate the arguments they're making, they should be asked how we modify the Constitution for any other radical departure from the founders' interpretation. The answer is simple: a constitutional amendment. I will not address the practical negative ramifications of D.C. statehood, but will let my colleague from Georgia present those, and there are many. Liberal progressives supporting this bill support stealing billions from their very own constituents to send it straight to D.C. It's no wonder statehood for D.C. is so unpopular. For years, support for statehood across the country hasn't even reached 30%. Today, well over half of Americans reject D.C. statehood. The Democrats arrogantly say that's because the American people don't understand what statehood means. But my constituents in Kentucky's 1st Congressional District know exactly what it means. Consolidating Speaker Pelosi's power in Washington to enact radical policies that have consistently been rejected by the American people. The Democrats want you to ignore the issues I've addressed, but we aren't going to let that happen. If Democrats were serious about D.C. becoming a state, they would introduce a constitutional amendment, like the U.S. Constitution implies must happen in not one, but 2 places. But Democrats are not serious. Instead, they're setting aside the Constitution in order to give progressives a quick win so they can achieve their goals of defunding the police and enacting a new Green Deal. There is zero chance this bill would pass judicial review. The courts know better. The Senate knows better. All of our constituents, who Democrats prefer to call ignorant even though they understand basic civics classes, knows better. H.R. 51 is an unconstitutional and unworkable bill and is rejected by the American people. Congress must reject this proposal. Congress knows better.